What is up, everybody? Welcome to yet another episode of Father Dynasty. I'm your host, Chew, here in the manhole, here to talk a little fatherhood and a little Dynasty fantasy football. And a very special guest with me today. You've seen him before, and you know him. When he's on the pitch, he's quick to raise his flag for offsides. As my Dynasty commissioner, there's no trade he overrides. He is a frequent flyer here on Father Dynasty, and we do not have a rewards program yet, but he will be the first one to be added on there if we do. Tyler Daly, how are you doing, buddy?
Doing great, Chew. As you mentioned, we're now in full swing here for high school soccer in North Carolina. So been raising that flag left and right all over town. We'll be doing that on the pitch tomorrow night. Excited to discuss some buy and sell here among some other things tonight. And as our listeners know, we're on the eve of NFL football. So really getting to that time where I'm ready to see the product instead of wondering what it's going to look like.
Yeah, we've enjoyed this entire offseason to just talk camp news, talk all of the unfun things, I guess, to the untrained Dynasty eye. But now we've got, I think final cuts are coming up here in the next 2 days because we're recording here on Monday. And we, of course, had week 0 of college football just finished up there. And I, of course, spoke with your lovely wife last episode, talking much about the SEC, college football as a whole. Of course, her Mississippi State Bulldogs. But in terms of our alma mater, Virginia Tech, we're ready to be disappointed, and I'm very excited for that. So week 1, we've got the Hokies heading east to Norfolk, and that's to a college that actually I almost transferred for my mechanical engineering degree. I got smart, I switched to business, and I went to Virginia Tech, never looked back. But personal stories aside, what are your expectations for the Hokies here in 2022?
I think if we go bowling, I'll be happy. You know, depending on where you shop for your lines, you're seeing Virginia Tech anywhere from 6 to 6.5 on the season win total. So there's a lot of winnable games on the schedule. I think that with the cupboard being left somewhat bare, at least in terms of depth on the team, I think that the starting lineup is good enough to get to a bowl, maybe even win 7 or 8 games in a best case scenario. But the depth isn't there. So when you start to get into the grind of a football season, the odds that you're going to stay healthy year long are very, very, very slim. So I think that if they're able to get to 6 or 7 wins, that should be a tremendous success in Brent Pry's first year. I'd like to see a renewed return to just what made Virginia Tech great to begin with the lunch pail defense. I don't know if everybody saw, but Virginia Tech is bringing that back now. It's officially back with Bud Foster's blessing. I saw a YouTube interview on a separate podcast where he talked a little bit about that. So just getting back to that physical brand of football, you know, Virginia Tech was never built winning games 45 to 32 or anything like that. You know, we were winning games 28-17 and, 17-10. And so football has evolved a little bit, so we're probably not going to get all the way back to that level. But I think if we can see a return towards something like Wisconsin has, or, more like a Big Ten style of football, which fits Brent Pry, given his history at Penn State, but something where, you're scoring in the high 20s, low 30s, and you're expecting to win games because your defense is going to hold them below that.
I mean, as we are known as DBU, so I would like to think that it can be beyond just the defensive backs. And actually, I mean, we've currently bred plenty of interior linemen and those in the front 7. So hopefully they can do that. Hopefully it's a renewed sense of recruiting with what Brent Pry is going to bring in, not just this season, but going forward. Looking at the schedule, it looked like it was basically the first couple of games right before you get to Pitt, Miami, and NC State. I'm sure the season's pretty much decided before that, because if the assumption is we're not going to win any of those 3 games I just mentioned, but then we can maybe end with some wins against Georgia Tech, Duke, Liberty, and UVA. That 7 or 8 win could be pretty fantastic. And certainly if it's the Brent Pry, you hear him in the media and everything, and he sounds like the right guy. And there's plenty of those opportunities that happen, certainly in college football, where the guy comes in, it sounds good, and then it just all falls apart. But I think that since there is a bit of a connection there, and I think he understands what Hokie football means to Blacksburg, I kind of feel like that has to translate on the field at least a little bit, at least for maybe 1 to 2 wins of just him willing them to win a game. So hopefully that's the case. I know that us Hokie fans have went through plenty of tough times and just ridiculous losses, and the drinking game of every time you miss a tackle, watching Hokies gets you blackout drunk by halftime. So enough Hokie talk for now, but maybe shift to the more broader college football landscape leading into the pros. So from a dynasty perspective, as this is Father Dynasty, who is a non-quarterback that you're watching closely leading into 2023 rookie drafts, as that'll be the next rookie draft that we're looking at for our dynasty leagues?
There was a guy I immediately thought of, and it also gives me a chance to give a little jab at my wife for making a mistake last week on the podcast, because she mentioned somebody by the name of Jahmyr Young, where he may exist somewhere, but she meant to reference Jahmyr Gibbs. I think she smushed Bryce Young and Jahmyr Gibbs together, but Jahmyr Gibbs, the running back from Alabama, transfer from Georgia Tech, is somebody that I have seen over the last couple of years at Georgia Tech and was pretty high on. And now that we're really going to get a chance, I think, to see what he can do, it seems like he's, if not going to be the bell cow, probably going to lead the backfield for Alabama this year. He's the type of running back that I want on a fantasy football team, because it's not very often in college that running backs get the chance to show their receiving chops. It's just, for some reason, outside of if you're running like a true air raid or something, there's just not a lot of offenses that pass to the running back that often. There are exceptions. I think that, Jahmyr Gibbs is one of them. I looked up, he had, I think, 750-ish yards on the ground last year for Georgia Tech and caught 36 balls for another 500 yards, almost 500 yards. So you're looking at a 1,200, 1,300 all-purpose yard running back for one of the worst teams in the Power Five last year. I mean, Georgia Tech won 3 games. So, he got it done on a team that is bereft of talent, if you will. So I'm excited to see what he can do for the Crimson Tide this year. I wouldn't go so far as to say that I think he's going to be like a Heisman contender or anything, but I think he's really going to get the chance to showcase his abilities. And if he keeps trending the way that I think he will, I likely think he will be, one of the top 3 running backs taken off the board next year in rookie drafts.
It's a big name on a big team, and I think if I know I'm not as bullish on Kenneth Walker as many are, but I mean, if you see someone who is a good running back go to a better situation, it very, very much will prop up his draft stock. Certainly going from that team to Alabama. A guy that I was looking at who everyone knows the name, but I think a guy who's been able to stand out amongst one of the best wide receiver groups year over year in college football at Ohio State is Jaxon Smith-Njigba. And ironically enough, pointing out his best game last year against Utah, a team that I think is going to be the 4th team that makes the college football playoff this year. I'd like to think that he could possibly have a Devonta Smith-esque rise in his final year. I could hope it ends in a Heisman. I think it's probably going to end up being Bryce Young repeating, but he's a guy who, I know the sexier dynasty pick really for Superflex or 1QB is going to be a running back. If you can get that guy who is a bell cow or at least pretty damn close to it, then that's who you're going to go for if it's not going to be a quarterback. So it's a guy who I'm looking at, and I think we've talked enough college football, and I want to talk buy-sell. That is buy-sell. It's not too cartoonish, and it made me feel like Ocean's 11, so I had to do it. So buy-sell, everyone's familiar with it. We're going to do it here where we each get one buy and one sell for each position and kind of just talk through our reasons for each and then kind of give a little back and forth if there's anything additional to add there. So for quarterbacks, we'll start with who is your buy?
I wrote down Trevor Lawrence. I think that there's just I wouldn't say zero chance. There's a very small chance that he's as bad as he can be as bad as he was last year. I think that the situation in Jacksonville was just so dysfunctional with Urban Meyer. We all know there's so many jokes that came up, whether, it's him groping some, chick half his age in a bar, or, him not even knowing that one of his defensive players was out with an injury. There's just a litany of signs pointing to how bad that situation was. And we're looking at a guy who was the slam dunk 101, whether you were in a single quarterback league, super flex, 2 quarterback league, whatever. Like, everybody was hammering Trevor Lawrence with the first pick, and rightfully so. I think that he's, a year ago, he was the biggest example of a generational talent we've had at quarterback since Andrew Luck came out of the draft. What was that, 2012, 2013, somewhere in there. So I think this is, if you're even somewhat still a believer in Trevor Lawrence, now's your last chance to buy for any reasonable price.
Yeah, I have to think, certainly going from Urban Meyer to anything else, but maybe going to Doug Peterson, a guy who is a seasoned coach. I think he understands how to scheme people the right way and kind of understands whoever he's dealing with, he will make them better as best he can. And Trevor Lawrence, for statistically how, not poorly, but how, I guess, he didn't really reach what people hoped he would as a generational talent. I mean, he did show resiliency in having to go through just a complete shitstorm. And I don't remember seeing, and I'm not hounding the Jaguars media necessarily, but I don't remember seeing any big notable clip where it was him just destroying the team, the coaches, anything. I mean, he just kind of handled it with as much grace as he reasonably possibly can. So I think that speaks well of him and his character, and I think that's who they were buying. But also they were getting a player who is meant to be the do-it-all quarterback. And a guy who I've spoken about ad nauseum, and another quarterback from the class, Davis Mills, a.k.a. Millsians. I see him, his floor as the quarterback 20, maybe creeping up into maybe between 15 and 20. I'm not going to get too overzealous to think that the Texans offense is going to be elite as a whole, or that, I understand that even if he had a very good season last year, and that was in a team that was not good in terms of talent, and this year there is at least a bit of continuity with coaching, with many of his weapons, with Brandon Cooks, Brevin Jordan, Nico Collins, and of course they had already a Hall of Famer in Dameon Pierce apparently. But one thing that I did like about that too is there was the continuity. So they have Pep Hamilton, who he is now the offensive coordinator, and with him having experience with one of Davis Mills's 3 favorite players who he kind of modeled his game after in Andrew Luck. I mean, if Pep Hamilton had the experience of working with Andrew Luck at Stanford, followed him to the Indianapolis Colts, and did well there despite them not giving Andrew Luck a very good O-line, I think if they maybe handle the O-line and just the offense as a whole a little bit better than they did in Indy and Luck's time, I think that Pep Hamilton can provide a very good offensive scheme for Davis Mills. And Davis Mills, I think, is a very, very good quarterback. Maybe more of the older style, but he is surprisingly athletic, but not shockingly athletic. So
I like that a lot. I mean, I feel like I've consistently found myself either because you're lobbing these subconscious grenades into my mind, or a combination of just thinking more about it. But like, I feel like I'm finding myself talking myself into the Texans as a whole and Davis Mills a little bit more. Maybe it's because I'm a Nico Collins investor. I think that he has a shot to take a big leap forward this year. But I think the Texans are going to be, I'm not going to go crazy and say that they're going to win, 8, 9, or 10 games, but I think that they're a lot better than people are giving them credit for. I saw some outside of that one, what was it, like a 1-point fantasy outing that Davis Mills had last year where I completely roasted him in our league email. It was like the worst performance is Nathan Peterman with the Bills. But I think outside of that, I mean, he had a lot of positive things in his rookie year, especially given just what a total utter shitstorm the Texans were with everything going on both on and off the field last year. So I like that a lot.
I appreciate it. And in terms of shitstorms, who are you selling at quarterback?
I'm going to sell Justin Fields. I think that everything that the Bears have shown us this offseason, I don't know if it's just front office ineptitude or if they're intentionally trying to set him up to fail. But as much as you might like Darnell Mooney, as much as you might like Cole Kmet, those guys are secondary, tertiary options. They're not somebody, at least to my untrained eye, that you build an offense around. And it concerns me that this regime now did not draft Justin Fields. And we see that at times in the NFL when new coaching staffs come in, they didn't, maybe, they want the job, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to go all in on the guys the previous regime's quarterback. So it kind of looks to me like this seems like a really big prove it year for Justin Fields and this coaching staff moving forward. I don't know if I think the Bears are going to be bad enough to warrant like a top 3 pick, but I think there's a non-zero chance that we could be looking at a situation where they're dumping Justin Fields this year, a la Josh Rosen, shortly after he failed in Arizona. So that's who I'm selling.
That's fair. I mean, certainly if you look at how poor it was last year, he was running for his life. I mean, I know in the couple of games that I watched with him, or just some of the clips, he looked pretty dejected on the sideline after getting multiple sack games. And just, at that time, really, his only option was Mooney because Allen Robinson was in and out in terms of whether it was with injury or, seemingly not wanting to be there. Now he's fine. He's in LA, but I can hope that Fields will do better. I think better's fair, but as we were talking about the other week, when you had sent what their depth chart was looking like, just like this is who they're rolling at. Like, they've spent an offseason, they've drafted, they've had options for free agents. They've elected to put these people on a starting offense. And the funny thing is, even if you're not going to give them immense weapons, kind of like a New York Jets or something like that, and just prove it, they also really didn't fix the O-line to a tremendous degree, which is very baffling to me. I really didn't think that you would need to necessarily invest a bunch of money and instead maybe invest a decent amount of draft capital in it. Just hopefully you can grow the offensive line with Justin Fields. And they didn't do that. But I am, of course, a big Mooney and a big Kmet guy. So Kmet's still thinking he's going to crack be a tight end 1 this year. Mooney do well, but I don't know about wide receiver 1 necessarily. That'd be crazy if it happened. But a sell, as I've realized that we're all sticking in the same draft class for quarterbacks, my sell is Mac Jones. I know that he was the, most efficient, best quarterback of his class last season. He had that one really hilarious game where I think he had like single-digit passing attempts, or maybe he had like 10 or so. It was just kind of how the scheme went. That's what Belichick does. But
no, it was that wind game versus Buffalo. They threw the ball 3 times. I'll never forget that as long as I live. 3 times they threw the ball.
So bizarre. And, it's now having a new offensive coordinator, a la Matt Patricia, who was the defensive coordinator and then is a defensive head coach. A failed defensive head coach coming back to Papa, if you will, and now switching to offense for some reason. I don't really know why. And I have my doubts that you have Mac Jones, who, again, with the class, did probably the best last year. I feel like there's a lot of other quarterbacks in that class that are probably looking to take that step up, and I can see it happening. I can see how it happens. This one doesn't seem to be the case, and I can see him, at least for this season, and depends on how it goes for the next couple of years, falling into the latter 3 of those kind of top 6 quarterbacks in terms of who's been viable starters thus far, which includes Trey Lance this season if he's going to get that starting job there. So what do you think about old Mac?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. The only thing that maybe wouldn't have me totally out, and none of us will know the answer to this, but is if I don't know what Bill Belichick's current contract situation is. I should have looked that up but if he's locked up for the long term, I'd be hesitant probably to sell Mac Jones. That would be the main reason I would want to hold on to him, is just because it's the quarterback for Bill Belichick. Like, I'm not saying he's going to make him into another Tom Brady, but we just know that Belichick is going to win games. That doesn't necessarily always translate to fantasy success because, he's the master of using like 4 running backs that you've never heard of and, making famous wide receivers out of guys that were bagging groceries last week. But that would be my only hold. I don't think I would necessarily ever find myself in a position where I feel the need to buy Mac Jones, but that would be at least my hesitancy in selling.
It seemed like you were shit talking Chris Hogan for a second, but that couldn't have been it.
No, I would never.
Well, I think we've covered quarterbacks, and jumping over to running backs, the sexiest position in fantasy football. Who are you buying at this position?
I put down A.J. Dillon, somebody I think after both of our redrafts last night and texting with you a little bit, I know you're high on as well. You're probably not going to get a great price on him right now unless you have an owner that doesn't really understand what he's got with A.J. Dillon. But Aaron Jones is entering his age 28 season this year. And I say that begrudgingly because I love Aaron Jones. He's on Nib-High Football, as you very well know. And I looked at his contract situation. Green Bay can cut him with a pretty acceptable, what I would call an acceptable cap hit after this year. I think it'd be like a $7 million cap hit. And we just see, constantly in today's NFL, teams moving on to running backs that are still on rookie deals. And if you look at how the Green Bay offense is constructed now that post Davante Adams, we're all clamoring to find who the next great pass catcher is. I think there's a very real possibility that maybe he just doesn't exist. We're trying to hammer Alan Lazard into this. We're trying to revive the corpse of Sammy Watkins, or bring in Romeo Dubes, like Jake said the other week. I really love that. But or Robert Big Bob Tonyan coming off the ACL tear. Maybe the answer is really obvious, and Green Bay is going to have a stout defense this year. Maybe they're just going to be a ground and pound team. I'm not going to say they're going to be like the Ravens, because we obviously know we're looking at two vastly different quarterback styles. But the two best players outside of the quarterback on the Green Bay offense are in the backfield, and Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon. So A.J. Dillon's my hard buy, because I think you're getting a player that has some value this year and has tremendous amount of value moving forward, especially with the likelihood that you might see Aaron Jones get traded and or cut after this season. I'm not saying that's super likely, but I think there's a pretty solid chance we could be looking at this backfield. Reminds me of like the Saints 4 or 5 years ago, where Mark Ingram and Alvin Kamara were both startable every single week, even if they were on your team, because they were just going to funnel the offense through those guys. It was like they had nothing else. And I think that's what Green Bay's got going on right now.
Yeah. When they invested so little in the wide receivers, and I mean, that was investing in terms of, I guess it was Christian Watson was the second rounder that they got for a wide receiver. Mm-hmm. That was probably the biggest investment, even based on who else they also signed. But yeah, already having locked Aaron Rodgers up, and I think probably just accepting like, hey, we've got a top 10 or so offensive line. We have Aaron Rodgers locked down. We don't know what it looks like without Davante Adams and without a de facto stud receiver, but he'll just figure it out because he's uber talented, and we'll just ride it till the wheels fall off. But they do really have, I would say, the best running back tandem in the NFL right now, if not at worst top 5. So I think that's a luxury to have now. And I'm reasonably bullish on Kylan Hill also. I know he got a little bit of play last year and of course got hurt. But hopefully if he can heal up, and if it's looking at A.J. Dillon and Kylan Hill again, then you can get to next year's draft and all that, picking up more running backs through the draft. I think that would be beneficial.
He's on the cut candidate list for Nib-High Football, and I really don't want to cut him, obviously, because he went to Mississippi State. So anytime I can hold a player from my wife's college, I want to do that. But I'm nervous he might not make the 53 man. He's on PUP right now. So, but I'm with you. I was a fan of his coming out, so I'm hoping that he can make the roster. But yeah. I wanted to add this tidbit. This is really random, but we were talking about the Green Bay wide receivers. Did you see the rumor about Will Fuller and Green Bay? Mm-hmm. That, like, they apparently approached his agent with interest about signing him earlier this offseason, and he turned it down because he didn't want to play in the cold. I don't know if that's true or not. I heard it, or I think I read it like on just a dark web fantasy football article that someone claimed to know something, but I thought that was fantastic, especially because he played at Notre Dame. So like he's played in the cold before. So maybe he realized he hated playing in the cold there or something. But I think like everybody's been kind of wondering why Green Bay is sitting on their hands all offseason, not signing Will Fuller or Julio Jones or Odell Beckham or, whoever else is out there. But I just thought that was kind of funny.
Wow. Well, in terms of my buy, and this was chosen before there was a shooting, of course. So my buy is Antonio Gibson, and with Brian Robinson, of course, he had as a day or so ago, he had the shooting to his lower extremities. I don't know what the full report was of, how many and all that, but of course they were saying he's in stable condition, and I guess none of them are life-threatening necessarily. And they even, I think, expect him to possibly come back this season to play, which is awesome. But I know that a lot of the camp news have basically just trended towards, holy shit, Antonio Gibson is on the kick return team. Holy shit, Antonio Gibson, everything was basically just, it seems as though Antonio Gibson is being slowly pushed out. Brian Robinson is being eased right back in to that front spot and getting the early down work. J.D. McKissic, of course, was a big offseason talk with him going to the Bills and then spurning that deal to come back to Washington, likely for the same role that he had. And, of course, I'm a big Jarrett Patterson fan, and no one cares, and neither should they. But with Antonio Gibson, he's just such a weapon. I understand that he was so raw coming out of college, and to just plop him just as a pure running back was probably a lot to ask for. But he also did finish as the RB13 and RB10. So I think it's hard to say. I know that fantasy doesn't determine NFL success necessarily, but it's not to say that he's like a mobile quarterback and it's like a Jalen Hurts where it's like, oh, well, he was, a top 10 quarterback or top 5 quarterback in fantasy, but his completion percentage was shit and the Eagles weren't that good. And I mean, I'm not saying Washington's good by any means, but Antonio Gibson had 2 very good seasons to start. And I think it might just be more of, they're going to try to be more flexible with how they use him. And I'm never going to believe, like Riverboat Ron said, that he sees a little Christian McCaffrey in him. That is a nonsensical statement, and I think he should have never said that. But I'm absolutely going to buy that talent. And even once Brian Robinson's back, even if he does take maybe a slightly greater share of the early down work, I think Antonio Gibson can be used a little bit of everywhere, even included in the returning game, if that is what they think they need to do. So what do you think about that one?
So I'm going to frame my answer as you pretty much did because I think the landscape has changed a lot, obviously, given what's happened to Brian Robinson. So I'm going to frame my answer Brian Robinson and the unfortunate incident that occurred yesterday. So this is actually off of the list that you gave me. This is the one I disagreed with the most. I'm actually like hard out on Antonio Gibson. I just think personally that what the franchise is, I'm a big believer, and don't get me wrong, I'm far from an oracle in this regard, but I a lot of times subscribe to what I believe the franchise is trying to tell me. And with them taking I know it's a 3rd round running back. It's not the end of the world, but it seems like for whatever reason, they're actively trying to not give him passing down work. Like we kind of expected, let's say J.D. McKissic in an alternate universe does sign with Buffalo and stays up there. And we just look at Antonio Gibson, Brian Robinson, and some guy off the street. Maybe they draft another running back. I'm all in on Antonio Gibson because that to me would be a buy signal that they're ready to pass him the ball a little bit more. But for whatever reason, it just seems like they're always trying to work in somebody else. And I think that there's a decent chance that the Commanders just suck this year. I know they have, obviously Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson. We don't know what he's going to be yet, but the talent is certainly there. Carson Wentz has just not shown us anything over the last couple years. And maybe we get into a situation where we're looking at a rough start and then we get Sam Howell halfway through the year. And then we really don't know, what direction that this ship is going. So, honestly, I hate to endorse people taking advantage of a situation like this, but if I had Antonio Gibson, I think right now I would be trying to sell him because this might be your last chance before he's worth like dust. So,
yeah, he's definitely if it's buy him, don't buy him, maybe thinking he's going to be the RB10 this season and like a lock necessarily. But there's a bit of uncertainty there. And just want to say, Sam Howell is going to be the starting quarterback before his contract is up. Wentz is just almost was an MVP bridge quarterback. Like if he did not have that season, which again, I understand it didn't even come to fruition because he got hurt. But if he had more of like just an average season that season, he would never be talked about the way he's talked about now. It's almost like Cam when he actually got an MVP season and it just kept being held on to over and over and over and over again. And here we are half a decade later, basically. And it's just like, yeah, it's not the same guy. And Carson Wentz was never been that good in my opinion, but
I have this weird special, he's not aware of it, but Sam Howell and I have this weird special connection because he is from Indian Trail, North Carolina, which is right outside of Charlotte. And James River Equipment opened up a location in Monroe, which is just beyond Indian Trail. And for a little bit over a year, I was driving out there, kind of pulling a shift, working at that store, helping out. And the highway you have to take to get to the store, fairly prominent highway for people that go to the beach in North Carolina. So it's billboard spaces. That's like the Super Bowl of billboards in North Carolina is the 74 corridor going east. And Sun Valley High School in Indian Trail, where Sam Howell went, took out this big billboard that was like, "Good luck, Sam, next year." And the original one, I believe, he was committed to Florida State. So it was like, "Good luck at Florida State." And then he decommitted and went to UNC. So they had to like put up a new billboard, or they like painted over the Florida State or something like that when he flipped his commitment. But I just felt like every day going into work, I was driving by Sam Howell. So I just like have this kind of hope that maybe one day he's gonna be something. So rooting for him.
He's gonna be something. I mean, leading the NFL in the preseason in passing yards. That's something.
He showed his rushing chops too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And speaking of rushing chops, you're not excited about, who is the running back you're selling?
David Montgomery. Sorry to hit on the Bears and back-to-back sells, but again, doesn't belong to the current regime. He's in his contract year. I just expect the offense to be really, really bad. Like you already hit on the offensive line, so I won't go there again. But especially now that we have Khalil Herbert, go Hokies, nipping at his heels a little bit, I think that I would, if I was a David Montgomery owner, I would use this opportunity to sell, because I don't think the Bears will give him an extension. And once he hits the free market, I think David Montgomery is just kind of whatever. Like, I think he's a replacement level player or slightly above. So best case, you're looking at a situation where he goes to somewhere like where he's part of a 2 or 3 man committee again. So he may, I expect him to have a decent year this year, strictly just because he's going to get volume. I mean, if he stays healthy, he's going to get volume. He's in a situation where he looks like he's good, like one of the few 3 down backs in this league, but I think it's this year and then it's over.
Yeah, it was many moons ago, and I'm not comparing their playing styles necessarily, but he kind of reminds me of a Houston Texans Lamar Miller, where it was truly just volume, and it was basically just because they chose not to look elsewhere. And they weren't looking elsewhere initially, or it didn't truly pan out because of some of the backup quarterbacks there for a number of different reasons. But now it's a new regime. Khalil Herbert, of course, I know is a stayover from the previous regime, but again, showed what he could do, filling in, I think, 4 or 5 weeks, 4.5 weeks while Montgomery was out last year. And Treston Ebner, rookie, but I think has done an admirable job, at least in the preseason. So I think if it's moving on from Montgomery and then having Herbert and Ebner as a 1-2 punch, that could be good. So I completely agree with that. And my sell here, Isaiah Pacheco. So I know that Jake, just lambasted this guy in a previous episode, but I'm going to go ahead and I'll credit Alfredo Brown. So there's a recent tweet, I think it was about a week or so ago, kind of looking at his game and talking about his preseason attempts, and just, saw him as a guy who he's always going 110%, but he doesn't necessarily have that patience to just kind of work within the running lanes and that sort of thing. It kind of struck me as, of little what I've seen of him, which is mostly just a lot of the clips and everything, I agree with that. And then that makes me worried that if it's getting much production out of the preseason and you run in that way, it makes it feel like you're just like that preseason darling where you're just trying your hardest, which you want that. But if you're trying your hardest and that's the production you get in the preseason, and when you get to the next level, when it's regular season, certainly as defenses, figure you out and figure out your scheme and everything, it's going to get a lot tougher. And I'm not saying he can't adjust to it, but I think it's going to he's going to be having an uphill battle to actually become the guy in Kansas City. And I think that Kansas City backfield is going to be an absolute nightmare this season.
Yeah, I agree with you. I was in on Isaiah Pacheco when he was going in redraft somewhere in, where he was basically free, when you could get him with your last pick or 14th, 15th round or whatever. But like some of the fantasy guys I follow, like Evan Silva or Adam Levitan, some of these guys that do like high stakes drafts and stuff, where I saw him go like in the round 7, legitimately. Now that's crazy. Like, yeah. We'll back off. I think like his ADP is somewhere probably like in rounds 10 through 12 at this point. that needs to just settle way the hell down. Like this all has to be predicated on Ronald Jones getting cut, right? Because if Ronald Jones doesn't get cut, like you said, this backfield's a total mess because we don't really know what the Chiefs think of Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Like, is he even really the sole starter at this point? Jerick McKinnon, I know he's 30, but he could catch passes out of the backfield. He performed admirably for them down the stretch last season. And we saw Ronald Jones have some, at least he can't catch the ball worth a shit, but he can run. We saw that in Tampa Bay. And so I think, if we're looking at that backfield of CEH, Pacheco, and Ronald Jones and Jerick McKinnon, like, I don't want a single part of it. Now, you cut Ronald Jones and Pacheco's in here. Like now you've got my attention a little bit, but I don't want to be too boring and agree with you all the way, but I just the hype train has gotten a little bit out of control.
Yeah, it's funny with last season how you have Darrell Williams, who was just like, how does he keep getting opportunities? And it's like, well, I mean, there's no one that's really standing out in the backfield. That's how he kept getting those opportunities. And I mean, even Derek Gore had some opportunities last season, became a kind of a waiver darling every now and again when he had a big game or a big couple of touches there. But yeah, it was funny watching the offseason play out once it was them losing Tyreek Hill, trying to plug the hole with an MVS and a Juju Smith-Schuster and all that nonsense. But the focus was who's going to replace Tyreek Hill. And it was never, even when Tyreek Hill was there, that backfield is a mess. So you take Tyreek Hill out, you try to fix that, and you still have to fix the backfield, who I guess from a collective running back standpoint from fantasy, I guess they do okay, but you don't know where it's going to come from. Yeah. So there's no bit of consistency or no bit of predictability in how they're going to do that.
It's kind of like the Patriots backfield, when Brady was still up there. It was like you knew people were going to pop off, but like outside of when LeGarrette Blount was like steamrolling people for a couple years there, like you really didn't know on a week-to-week basis where it's going to come from. Like like you said, the core, the sum of the parts is good, but like you don't know who's gonna pop off.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to start Brandon Bolden thinking he's going to play the first 2 drives and get 2 touchdowns, but who knows? So jumping over to wide receivers, who are we buying in this category?
CeeDee Lamb, no Amari Cooper, Michael Gallup. Looks like he's going to start the season on PUP. It's going to be out at least until October, maybe longer. It's going to be the CeeDee Lamb show. I know they have Dalton Schultz as well. I hope, just from a fan standpoint, that they work in Tony Pollard more this year, because right now the playmakers on the offensive side of the ball seem to be pretty non-existent, or at least unproven. I know people are trying to pipe up Jalen Tolbert a little bit. I don't necessarily have a strong opinion on him one way or the other, but all that funnels into you're looking at a guy at CeeDee Lamb that might have like a 30+% target share this year. And Dak has shown that he can support multiple high-end wide receivers. He did it with Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb for the last couple years. And right now it's like, okay, it's CeeDee Lamb, and sure, like we said, maybe Dalton Schultz, maybe a little over here passing to Zeke or Tony Pollard. But once James Washington got hurt, I wasn't necessarily counting on him for a ton of targets, but it's like the focus just keeps getting narrowed. So I'm all in on CeeDee Lamb.
Yeah, I know that the Cowboys certainly didn't know that any of this was going to happen, but I mean, Gallup got the contract he did while he was hurt. Cooper got sold for peanuts, and Cedric Wilson left for Miami, who I was really excited to see him get an opportunity if Amari Cooper was going to leave town, that Cedric Wilson was going to step up and kind of be a 3-2. I don't think he's a de facto second guy, but he also ended up getting shafted in Miami. Now he's probably stuck behind a couple more people, but I mean, the only other guy I can think of that's a stayover from last year was Noah Brown, who did a little bit here, a little bit there. So, yeah, it's going to be CeeDee Lamb. I mean, even while Amari Cooper was there, he's still getting 100 targets. So, I mean, he's going to get 120, 130, something like that, because that is one of the most high-powered offenses in the NFL. And even if you, of course, slide Tony Pollard into the slot, as that probably makes sense given how hurt everyone is. I mean, CeeDee Lamb's going to ball out. And I don't even think it doesn't really even take a tremendous amount of touchdowns to get him to climb to what I think will be his first wide receiver one season, but I think he's going to do pretty well. And Dak is definitely the guy. Now a seasoned quarterback. Kind of funny to think that he's already a bit aged now, but he's the guy that can handle that offense well. So my guy I'm liking, I'm going to buy DK Metcalf. And I don't believe in Pete Carroll. I am more of I think Penny's going to do a little more than Kenneth Walker, but combined, who's to say? I don't necessarily believe that Geno Smith is the guy that we thought he was coming out of college. But in the brief stint that we saw Geno Smith playing together with DK Metcalf and the other starters last season, he did well. And while that's just a small extrapolated couple of games there, I do see it as, even in a small passing volume offense, the ball has to go somewhere. And if you're going to have a guy like Geno Smith who is reasonably mobile, so he can kind of work around not having the best offensive line necessarily, but DK Metcalf is a physical freak. He's big, he can jump, he's quick, and that's the guy that is going to be able to get open and can at least bully people a la, I think it was Matt Kelly back in the day. He talked about the Tom Savage corollary where it was Tom Savage was coming in and he just pumped DeAndre Hopkins with a bunch of targets, like a bigger target share than he had even previously. And it doesn't mean the targets were better, but I mean, if you give someone, if they go from 10 targets to like 13 or 14 a game, it's probably going to level out there. And I think that, I know they now have Noah Fant, who's another pass catcher, but I think with this offense, he's going to be more focused on being a run blocker. He and Big Country Will Dissly. So DK Metcalf, I don't think is going to have a top 10 season necessarily, maybe top 20, but I think he's going to be a buy when everybody else is freaking out on that quarterback situation.
Will Dissly higher paid than Darren Waller, actually.
Crazy.
Not since Darren Waller is allegedly hiring Drew Rosenhaus. He's going to help him get his money.
Smart.
But I came prepared to fight you on the DK Metcalf stuff, but you kind of took the wind out of my sails a little bit. I mean, I like what you're selling here in this buy section. I feel like I've constantly kind of had a little bit of a bias against DK Metcalf, and it's totally personal because he went to Ole Miss, and my wife has me bought in on Mississippi State. So he was the first one who did. He started this unsavory trend for Ole Miss where when they score against Mississippi State, they crawl to the back of the end zone like a dog and then lift their leg like they're pissing. And I think he's the one that started it. And so obviously he's a jerk, but yeah, I feel like we've constantly been trying to poke holes in DK Metcalf ever since he came into the NFL. Like there was I think he had like a really bad 3-cone drill time or something in the combine. And so people were like, oh, he's just a straight end line wide receiver. Like he can't run routes. And so he fell, to the second round or whatever, wherever the Seahawks ended up taking him. I think it was second round. And he's just consistently proven everybody wrong. And so, like you said, he's a freak of an athlete. Why are we going to bet against his talent? Like, I don't care who's throwing him the ball. Like, the Seahawks are going to be trailing in a shitload of games. And who are you going to bet on? Are you going to bet on Geno Smith pinpointing Tyler Lockett? Or are you going to bet on Geno Smith just chucking it up to the dude who's like 6'6" and can jump over a freaking SUV? Like, you talked me into it.
Yes. Oh, I love that. And you almost talked me out of it because, I mean, you don't disrespect Mississippi State like that.
It's true, yeah.
So we're both on the fence, but how do you sit on a fence face down with the post in your mouth? So who is the wide receiver that you are selling?
I'm selling Davante Adams. 30 years old, obvious downgrade at quarterback. I know everybody wants to pump up the shower narrative, him and Derek Carr, old teammates. Listen, that was 10 years ago, maybe more. They don't even remember what it was like playing together. I'm sure, Davante Adams is obviously supremely talented, but he's entering a new situation, trying to rekindle an old flame with Derek Carr. And this is by far going to be the stiffest target competition he's ever had in his entire career. I mean, Aaron Rodgers could find Davante Adams blindfolded in a cornfield, but it was mainly because Aaron Rodgers knew he had nobody else. But you've got Hunter Renfrow, who's one of the probably arguably premier slot targets in the NFL now. You've got Darren Waller, a top 5 tight end. You've got a bevy of running backs in the backfield with Josh Jacobs, Zamir White. Like, there are plenty of other options now, where it was really Davante Adams and Aaron Jones for a while there in Green Bay. So 30 years old, now's the time to sell Davante while you still can.
I did not have Davante written down here, but I can agree with that sell for a number of different reasons, and you'll hear why when I talk about tight ends. But it is a new coach in town, and it very much seems like, at least based on the running backs he's bringing in, it seems like McDaniels is trying to recreate a little bit what he had in New England, in terms of he wants his weapons and he wants to be able to scheme and work within the game what works the best. And it helps to have just a bevy of weapons just kind of figured out game to game. But it's very frustrating for fantasy, and it's great to have Davante Adams, a guy who's been a wide receiver 1 year over year. Darren Waller, I know he was a bit hobbled last year. I know his rap career is taking off, and he's hopefully not losing focus of football. But the man's going to get paid, and then you have that and a good backfield there. So I see where you're going with that. And if there's any time to truly consider selling Davante Adams, it would be now, before he has a above average season this year instead of a stellar top 5, top 7 season. And my sell, he's been an off-season darling. I guess technically he was the tail end of last season darling. You have a lot of people on both sides of the fence, but Gabe Davis, his 50 burger that he had against Kansas City at the end of last season, guys, let it go. Like, I'm not saying he can't have those big boom bust games, but I don't think he's a bad player. I just think he is what he is, and I don't think that this is his floor and now he steps up to the next level. That offense truly seems to be, you've got Josh Allen, a guy who commands a lot of touches himself, in terms of, regardless of what the passes look like, he does rush a good amount himself. He does take away plenty of touchdowns himself. And with that backfield still kind of being a mess, I don't really trust James Cook necessarily. But we're going to feed Stephon Diggs. We're going to feed whoever's in the slot. The tight end's going to get a couple of touchdowns. Dawson Knox had a ridiculous amount last season, kind of an anomaly. I don't know that there's a big, consistent role left for Gabe Davis. And I think it's more so between the slot and Gabe Davis. Those two are going to kind of cannibalize one another. And Gabe Davis is not going to be that 50 burger was the next step. It's going to be Gabe Davis is still what we thought Gabe Davis is.
Yeah, I hear you. I don't know if I love it, because I'm just so high on the Bills as a whole. But I do agree with the sentiment that I think there's a high probability that he'll be really inconsistent. He's one of the, probably, as you very well know, and a lot of people listening will know, he's the most, probably, I would argue, the most hotly debated player of this offseason from a fantasy perspective. Because there are some people who think he's worthy of, a wide receiver 20 type pick. I don't know if I'm that in, but I don't know if I'm hard out either. So I'm like you said, I'm going to kind of sit the fence a little bit on this one with the pole in my mouth.
There you go. Yeah, I think with my estimations, I didn't even have him finishing in the top 30, just in terms of what I think he's going to do. I think there's going to be plenty of those weeks where you have those moments thinking like, yeah, if he holds on to this, that's when you sell him to someone who thinks he maybe creeps into the top 20. But when I look at, year over year, he finishes in the top 20. There's some anomalies here and there, but it's usually guys who are not just the boom bust guys. It's guys who've just got maybe a more steady opportunity and kind of grown into a role, not just the same role, boom bust. But jumping into the last position here, tight ends, who are you buying?
Project Pat Freiermuth had a great rookie season, and somewhat quietly, because he was fairly touchdown dependent, but I don't want to punish the guy for that. And somebody who earning targets is a skill. So someone who is earning red zone targets their rookie year in a competitive environment, where there are plenty of other options to throw the ball to, that's a buy signal for me. And for some reason, I'm not saying that we need to hype him up to the point that he's like, a top 10 tight end in terms of ADP, but Pat Freiermuth is pretty cheap right now insofar as someone who's had the success that he he had his rookie season. And we know tight ends usually take a little bit of time to develop. So he just seems a little undervalued to me. And if Kenny Pickett and/or Mitch Trubisky are serviceable and the Steelers continue to be what the Steelers have been for most of our adult lives, and that's a competitive, strong football team, then I want the starting tight end there.
Yeah, there's a guy on that team. I know you're a big Pickens guy as well. But when you look at what Freiermuth did last year, it was pretty incredible. He was one of the few tight ends who I feel like I watched his college tape a year later, watched his NFL tape. He's doing the same thing. He is a red zone monster. And then when they talk about, we're not sure what's going on with the quarterback, it's either going to be the guy who was a backup last year, or it's going to be the rookie who wasn't even picked until I guess later in the first. But we can't talk shit about Big Ben in his last waning years and talk shit about the quarterbacks who are going to be throwing to Project Pat now and separate the two and say, oh, well, he did good with Big Ben, but he can't do good with these other two quarterbacks. Yeah. He can do plenty fine. And it probably speaks a lot to, if it is such a good, stable organization, I think they could build a good enough offense, and it's certainly a very good defense, stellar defense, you have a good running back, you have a decent offensive line. I think they're still kind of putting that back together. So get them in enough scoring position, red zone opportunities that you get Project Pat, get him a couple of touchdowns. Maybe he has the level of, the Dawson Knox and becomes maybe top 10. I'm not too sure about that. But I know with the Deontay Johnson injury at the tail end of the preseason, apparently it wasn't a big deal. It was an AC sprain, I think it was, but you hate to see that kind of stuff happen. But in lieu of Pickens kind of ramping up and getting used to the offense, Pat's been there for a year, and I know it's a new quarterback, but it's the same system, and I think he can thrive. And my buy, as I may have hinted at earlier, Cole Kmet. So this will be his first season finishing in the top 10, or I call it the top 12, so tight end one season. So it's his third year. Justin Fields' second year. I mean, he had 93 targets last year, it's wild to think how bad the offense was. Just kind of like the mishmash of receivers he had, and the fact that there were still 93 targets that got over to Cole Kmet. I understand that the catch rate was pretty low. I think he had 60-something catches just because of how shitty the team was, and Justin Fields had no time to pass, and much of it was probably dump-offs. He also had 0 touchdowns, another anomaly. Although the Bears' offense was horrible, they were never in the red zone. But I think there is going to be growth from the team, and I think at least more scoring opportunities, as I don't see Cole Kmet being only a red zone scoring threat. But I think as he gets closer and closer, maybe on the other team's 40+, he can work within the seam. He can get those first downs, and he can get maybe some longer touchdowns, more so than maybe some other traditional tight ends could. That's my guy right there. I've been banging the drum for him. I truly believe in him, and I'd like to think it's not blind loyalty, but we'll find out this season. And if he proves me wrong, he's dead to me.
Yeah, I mean, I'm out on the Bears as a whole, so I'm just gonna leave it at that.
Fair enough. Well, sell. This is the final one. This is the final position, the final sell. How are we gonna end the tight end position here?
Travis Kelce.
Ooh.
Might be. It's a hot take probably, but he's entering his age 33 season. I know that he's going to probably have a great year, and I'm not arguing against that. But I was looking at don't ask me why, but I was looking at Travis Kelce snap counts. Because I'll tell you briefly why. Because 30 minutes before you enter a draft room, you know what your pick is, and so based on where I was in the first round, I was considering taking Travis Kelce. Either I had late picks, a late pick in the Yahoo draft, and so I was considering going like wide receiver Travis Kelce or Travis Kelce wide receiver. And I just kind of I got scared. His snap share has been ticking down every year, and I'm not saying that like Blake Bell is going to step up and start to like steal Travis Kelce's work, but I've seen this movie before, and the tight end cliff is usually really steep. It's not gradual whatsoever, and I think he might have a great year and shit all over this take, and then might just be dust, before we know it. So I'm going to sell Travis Kelce right now, while you can probably still get a pretty good value for him. I'm not saying maybe a first rounder, but high second or get a wide receiver you like.
Well, this I don't think it's crazy. It kind of feels like it aligns with way back in the day. I think it was either the first or second season in Dynasty of the league that we're talking about, that I had Julio Jones and I traded him. I think I remember reading something about, not specifically on Julio Jones, but kind of saying you always want to be 1 year before, not 1 year after. You don't want to catch him where he's on the downside and you can't even get a second for a guy who was a superstar not too long ago. And this does very much feel like that, but it's kind of weird that it feels like that when this could very well be like one of his best seasons considering his opportunity. But it's weird because also it's not like he had a bad opportunity before. It was he and Tyreek Hill could work kind of in concert in two different levels of the field. And Pat Mahomes is still there. O-line is still great. Defense, I think, is even more improved. But even with maybe a bigger opportunity share in terms of receptions, it is true. I mean, having a banged up season of having to be the guy, it's not can you contribute a good amount? It's you have to be the guy because you're the only person, no offense, McCole Hardman, that has a true connection with Pat Mahomes. And there's no one single offseason that's going to connect Mahomes and Juju Smith-Schuster, Mahomes and Sky Moore, Mahomes and any of those other guys. Sorry, MVS. And
you don't say that.
Yeah. I can agree with it. And I mean, honestly, you saying that, it's probably a hotter take than what I'm about to say, but I guess we're shitting on the old top 5 tight ends, but my sell is Darren Waller. And
coming after my guy.
Hey, well, it's almost the converse look of how you saw Davante Adams, where he already has the connection with him again from a decade ago at Fresno State. But Darren Waller, he's been Derek Carr's guy through some horseshit regimes. And now with what it's going to look like with the new coach, I do think it gets spread out more. I do think Renfro probably is the only one that doesn't get significantly impacted in a negative way. I think he just continues to be just a PPR monster. But I think between Waller, I know he was a bit hobbled last year, but still, I don't think he's even 30. I think he'll be 29 this year. Mm-hmm. He bloomed a little later in his career. I know he had some troubles earlier in his career and turned it around. He's going to earn the contract that I'm sure he's going to get very soon, and that's awesome. But I think it's more so, it's not like his talent is dwindling and he's falling apart. I think it's just that he doesn't need to be the double-digit target tight end on a team that doesn't have anything else and doesn't have an offensive identity, and they're lucky to get a couple of fluke wins against like some good teams. I remember that seemed to be like the narrative over the last like 2 or so years. They would out of nowhere beat a pretty good team in the regular season, and they would kind of be known for that, but then maybe not rise to the occasion against maybe a worse team. So I like Derek Carr. I like Derek Carr. I like all their weapons, but I think when you look at the whole picture and the coach, I don't see how Darren Waller, I don't even have him finishing as a top 5 this year. I mean, still probably just outside of that. But I know. But hey, it'll be funny when we're both wrong and they finish 1 and 2. So yeah, looking forward to that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not arguing against Travis Kelce this year. I definitely see your valid points against Darren Waller is just my guy, and not only because he's on the team, but also because I very rarely can get Slap and Pickle to accept a trade with me. And
dude,
this trade is the closest version of just like absolutely demolishing somebody in a trade that I think I've ever had. And it's just with the benefit of hindsight, but like JJ Arcega-Whiteside was about to start for the Eagles one week, and he was being piped up as like the next Alshon Jeffrey. And I sold him for Darren Waller. And I think, ironically enough, I think JJ Arcega-Whiteside is like trying to make the transition to tight end, much like Darren Waller did early in his career. Mm-hmm. So maybe he's not dead, but I'm just going to respectfully bow out given my severe bias for liking Darren Waller.
And you do know, JJ Arcega-Whiteside, he did get traded to the Seahawks. And because I think he was already trying to do his transition to the tight end in Philly. And then, I don't know, it was like a conditional pick or like 6th or 7th or something like that to go to Seahawks. But who knows? I mean, they want their blocking wide receivers there. I mean, if you flank him out next to, I guess he'd be probably behind Fant and Disley.
You have like a 3 tight end set with Will Dissly, Noah Fan, and JJ Arcega-Whiteside.
Just Pete Carroll, he has like the grits version of like what an offense should be. It's going to be as bland as grits is.
Yeah,
but
shoving it down their throat. 3 yards in a cloud of dust.
You're damn right. Well, that was our buy and sell. A long buy and sell. I'm sure we broke some hearts, but I'm sure we excited some too. And the last little thing we'll talk about here is it's always good to get your hot heat in terms of a dynasty take. Is it Mike Davis related this year? It could be, because he looks like he might still have an opportunity to be a first couple week stud helping out with J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards. But what is your hot dynasty take for 2022?
That was a good one last year. My hot take, and I kind of touched on it earlier in my buy sell with AJ Dillon, but maybe this isn't that hot, but given that Aaron Rodgers is the quarterback, I think it still qualifies the sniff test. I put that no Packers wide receiver is going to finish inside the top 24 this year. I think that, like I said, everyone's trying to shoehorn Alan Lazard in there, Romeo Doubs. Christian Watson obviously has not been healthy, so he hasn't had time to gel. And, we have the corpse of Sammy Watkins being trotted out there one last time to revive his career. I just think that the Packers are going to be one of the slowest paced teams in the NFL this year. I think Aaron Rodgers is going to be throwing the ball 24 to 30 times a game at most, and they're going to be just funneling that thing to Aaron Jones and AJ Dillon. So that's my hot take. It might be lukewarm, but I got scared, after throwing out the Mike Davis heat last year and just getting absolutely shit on. So.
Oh man, no, when I think I was on Sleeper and I saw that he was like one of the top ads, and I was like, what is happening right now? Yeah. It's like, this is just reminding me that I have to ask this question on this episode. I think it's a pretty hot take if you think of, who Aaron Rodgers is as a quarterback. No one thinks he's falling off by any means, considering his multiple MVP seasons as of late. So I guess you at least think like, well, they're giving him NFL caliber receivers theoretically, because they've made it this far, and someone's got to, so someone's got to stick out. But it could be a game by game basis. There's some younger guys there, and he's never been known to just fully entrust a rookie wide receiver with his luscious balls. So I think it's probably a lukewarm take, but I mean, I'm also completely on your side with that. I think it could be some bizarre thing where something like an Aaron Jones ends up being the leading receiver for the team. I mean, we know that they trust him, and like you were saying, I mean, if it could be that they get rid of him after this season, till the wheels fall off. I mean,
run him into the ground. Yeah,
damn right. And my hot take: if you thought your Mike Davis one got you buried, this one's probably going to really fuck me over.
I'm so excited.
So I think I've got this. I've got a tweet pinned, which is a couple of various takes that I have set for this season. This one's probably the hottest on there. I have Davis Mills outscoring Trey Lance.
Woo!
Yeah. Although I will say a bit of that is going to be, this was before Jimmy G, any of that kind of stuff that just happened. I guess it was as of not too long ago today that Jimmy G is going to be staying with the team, and I guess he's going to be the highest paid backup, and there's no trade clause and all this kind of stuff. But it felt like with me in San Fran, love Trey Lance, think he's going to be a great player, surrounded by weapons, has a great coach, offensive coordinator. Everything is kind of working for him. But I think it will be more of truly relying on the rushing game, not just him as the rushing game, but the weapons that he has and a lot of kind of backfield trickery, if you will. And with Davis Mills, I kind of feel like, while he doesn't have a wealth of rushing upside, I'm not, again, trying to prop up the Texans offense as being top 10, top 12, top whatever. But maybe I am. But I figured, I was like, if I'm going to pick a hot take, I'm going to pick one where if this happens, I'm going to get at least a plaque from someone that I don't know because of how ridiculously it actually happened.
This is going to put if you're right, this is going to put Father Dynasty on the map.
You're not wrong. And then when I get it wrong, they'll be like, yeah, there's that dumbass podcaster who thought he was going to say Davis Mills is going to outscore Trey Lance. And that is why his views
either
are
way,
so
it's
low.
a win-win. It's either horrendously bad or it's like freaking prophetic.
Yeah, I'll take that. And with that, guest gets the last word. And I will say, to her credit, your wife Megan did give you a shout out last week. So as I also, it's noted, you've shouted her out many times. So you also give those props as well. Yeah. So what are your parting words this week?
She was due to return the favor.
Exactly.
But I'm giving you the shout out, Shu. I just wanted to congratulate you on entering your second season as a podcaster in the fantasy football and specifically the Dynasty community. It's been a lot of fun being on with you. And I know that the off season is a grind from even just consuming content as a fantasy football fan. So hats off to you for sticking it out and looking forward to continuing stuff like this throughout the year and moving forward. So cheers.
Appreciate you. Just say that, of course, you will continue to be on a ridiculous amount, but also looking forward to bringing this sideshow to the FF Expo next year and see a little Canton action and grow the pod this year, of course. So thank you for being on.
Oh, yeah. Looking forward to it, man.
See you, brother.